I have a confession to make. I'm not really a social person. I really don't have the chance to be. In my fast-paced world of karate class, piano lessons, gymnastics, I really don't have time to slow down and hang out. So, this YouTube channel has been my chance to hang out virtually with all you different people out there, and it's been great. I love talking about different toy lines that I loved growing up, or it's been rare, and I hope to touch on it more later, but the TV shows, the movies, the things of our childhood. But those are set countdowns, if you will, and that's cool. You know, that's fun to do. I love doing that. But with not being very social, I don't get a chance to fully reminisce, to talk about my childhood in somewhat specifics. I, to be honest, don't have friends to hang out with. I have a job that I don't really connect with many people at, and this has been my only lifeline. And as far as my family goes, my kids are too young and don't care, and my wife has her own hurried life, just like I do with our children. So sometimes she doesn't have the time, and that's cool. I know. I deal with it. I know what it's like. So, like I said, this YouTube channel has been my way to connect to the outside world, to start a community, to make a community with like-minded people, and I've loved every second of it. But one of those things that I was saying that I miss is just that rich nostalgia of the specifics of our childhood. So after that somewhat creepy and long intro, this is just my way of saying that this is yet again another new little show, if you will. But it's not. I'm going to go back to sentimental, but this time I want to talk about those things, those memories, those little nostalgia bombs that go off in my head. And a lot of you out there are my age or roundabouts, and I'm sure you share those same memories, those same thoughts. And again, this is a time for me and all of you as this little My Side of the Laundry Room community that we can talk about these things in the comments, of course. We can virtually have that conversation that I so miss and crave, of talking about nostalgia, talking about our childhood, talking about the 80s, heck, even the 90s. Anyway, like I said, creepy and long-winded, so here we go. The new Sentimental. Hello and welcome. Same old intro, but this time we're going to drop all the other glitz and glam and the announcer or narrator or whatever you want to call it, and let's just talk. Let's just reminisce. This episode I want to talk about video store memories from the 80s. There has been a lot of talk recently about VHS tapes and their collectability, the fact that there's one last rental store in the world, I believe. There's one last Blockbuster, and or maybe that's hyperbole. I don't know. But one of my earliest memories, and this has to be 81, 82, somewhere in that time frame, was a video store. And back then, they were like your all service cool techno stores, because they also sold well, at least the one I'm talking about, sold records and brand new cutting edge turntables and VCRs and Laserdisc players. And the place just had believe me, it was mom and pop, but it just fueled my imagination with technology. They even had video games for sale. Back then, Atari, Pong, and television, things like that they had. And seeing those cases and the very small market of VCR tapes they had. What I remember they seemed to have the most of were video discs, or whatever you call them. The big discs. Pretty much, I think they're just pretty much a big metal record in a nice, colorful plastic sleeve that had the artwork on it. It had chapter selectings, I remember, on the back, and a large area to advertise what movie it was. That's my biggest memory I remember from that place, was just they had everything behind a glass display, and everything was behind the counter, other than a few, albums and Atari games and things out on the floor. But I remember on the floor, stacked, leaning up against this glass case, were all these video discs, or whatever they were called. Probably completely wrong on the name. But anyway, that was one of my first memories. And I don't even remember what we rented, what we were in there for. But probably after that, my next memory was... And this place was... hopping back to that, they were a husband and wife that ran this place, and they play into the story a little bit later. Not personally, but at different times their store has moved and changed, and as the market of video rental changed throughout the 80s and into the 90s, but I thought I would save that for a whole separate episode to talk about video rental in the 90s. Anyway, my next memory comes from when we actually had a VCR. They were very expensive back then, probably $1,000. And I remember when the thing finally died, which was, criminy, like 20 years later, and I was curious to what had broken on it. I opened it up, and it actually had leather pulleys in it, and large metal spindles that it ran on. But it was the pulley that broke. The leather finally gave way and dry rotted. But anyway, as I talk about the end of the VCR player, when I want to talk about the beginning of it. But I remember my parents got that. And their friends at the time also got one, but they got Betamax. So I remember one night my dad and his friend were up all night watching movies because they were transferring them from Betamax to VHS, VHS to Betamax. Like, they rented a couple of each on different formats. And I remember they did Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars, and I believe... there had to be something else. Anyway, those are the two that I really remember. And I remember that at least whomever, either it was my dad or his friend, took the pains of trying to duplicate the font of Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark on the side sticker. Which, back then, I remember this being more common. It was actually like graph paper. It had a grid on it. It just wasn't 3 lines or 2 lines or blank. It had like graph paper on it. So, and it was still a sticker, but I remember they took the pains of copying the font and the color. So, I mean, it's kind of cool to think of my dad and having this little crafty evening with his friend in doing this. Breaking the law, but it was the Wild West back then with VCR tapes, so. And they actually typed out on the tape itself the title, the director, the runtime, and the rating. I remember, like, they were trying to make it look as professional as they could. Really cool thinking about that. But I remember a video store which opened up near the grocery store that we frequented, and this is the one that I have kind of the most memories of at the youngest age of all the Walt Disney tapes. And there weren't that many out, so instead of it, everything was facing out like a Blockbuster, but this place was very small, and you had to take the case to the counter, and behind the counter they would get you out, you know, like a generic black box with the store name on it, which I even forget what the store's name was, what the rental place's name was. But I remember just all those Disney, the big white with the small picture and the Disney font at the top. I mean, all the live action stuff. I remember that more than any of the animated stuff. Like Island at the Top of the World, Swiss Family Robinson, even things like from the like Davy Crockett and stuff that used to run on Mickey Mouse Club. I mean, I grew up with all that stuff. I have a very fond love of the live action stuff of that era. Anyway, I remember on a special trip, we just went to pick up something that my parents had ordered. And back then, tapes were very, very expensive to purchase. But they purchased Dark Crystal. I want to say there was another movie, and I know there was, but I can't remember it at the moment. But I know one of them was Dark Crystal. In a beautiful case that was for rental. Sturdy, beautiful artwork on it. The tape itself felt like it weighed a ton because it was made to be watched 1,000,000 times. I still have it in storage at my parents', and one day I hope to get it. Not to be a tape collector of any sort, because, I mean, unfortunately it is a dead medium. But just to have it, to have that little bit of my childhood. So I remember that tape place. Now, fast forward to the mid-'80s, and a place I remember the most was Errol's Video. Now, I don't remember if that was a big chain or a franchise, but it seemed like it. They had a very uniformed display box, color scheme, uniform for the employees. And if you remember, their tape boxes were huge, and they actually had foam in it that the tape would rest in. It had an open top that you would put the tape in, and they had the artwork on the front and the back. Like, they actually cut out the boxes or the sleeve art and taped it or glued it onto the box, and then put a sleeve or coating over top of that. Later in life, like in the 90s, I came upon one, and it's in this collection, which is at my parents', but it's a copy of They Live Like That, an old Errol's Video. Again, that's something I hope to retrieve one day, just to have it for the nostalgia's sake. But one of the biggest rentals I remember getting from Errol's, like on a waiting list to get, was RoboCop. Little backstory on that, I remember going to the theater and my mom giving me the choice of Masters of the Universe or RoboCop because they came out around the same time. And I chose Masters of the Universe. Now, of course, now, knowing all the history and seeing the documentaries on it, yes, I appreciate the film for what it is, but as a kid, I was rightfully mad that it wasn't my He-Man from the cartoon and toy line. So I left the theater mad, and regretting my decision. So as soon as RoboCop came out on tape at Errol's, we rented it. We were on a waiting list, like I said. Yeah. I used to love Errol's. From there were other ones that popped up in our town. They seemed to last a few years and then disappear. I don't know if, I mean, I would think that tape rental back then was a lucrative business. I mean, there were some places that had shelves upon shelves behind the counter of the actual tapes, and the storefront was just full of all the beautiful tape covers and NES games for rental. The next one I remember the most is one that was near a pizza place just up the hill at another shopping center near us. And that one had so many NES games. And unfortunately, they bought and traded them as well. And I don't know if any of you grew up like this, but when you grow up kind of poor, when you're done with something, or in my case with NES games, if you've seen any of my good games for bad gamers, I sucked at them. So when you are just spending months being frustrated and not getting anywhere in a game, you just trade or sell it, because you don't have the cash just to buy a new game. So you kind of lived hand in mouth in this trading system. As I got older, it was the same things with CDs and tapes and movies, actually. There's VCR, there's VHS tapes that used to be hundreds, that when they came down to $20, $10, and you'd buy them, watch them a handful of times, and I want to get something new, and you would trade them around at different shops or, pawn stores. But anyway, I remember wanting Golgo 13 so bad, and this place had it, and all their games, even for rental, had a used sale price on it. So I took a bunch of the games that I had, pretty much my whole collection at the time, traded them in to get Golgo 13. And the one reason that game spoke to me as a kid so much was, I think, the first person point of view and the sniper shooting, because that was kind of unheard of at that time with the NES. I mean, everything was a side scroller, or RPGs, which were starting to get really popular. I'd never seen anything like that before, and I didn't know its backstory until many years later of the anime and the manga of Golgo 13. From those memories, it kind of becomes a blur, because VHS tapes became just so readily available. Grocery stores were starting to carry them for rental. I mean, I remember, little side note, I hate jumping topics, but do you remember when grocery stores would have collectible, like, encyclopedias, like the Peanuts or Disney ones? Yeah, that was always awesome, but would always get the introductory bundle and never get the rest of them. It always sucked. But anyway, yeah, I remember grocery stores having a small rental area, like the same counter that they sold stamps and stuff from. You could also take your VHS sleeved up to and get the tape. Yeah, I remember having to run in. My mom would pull up to the curb, and I'd have to run through the grocery store to return movies before they were late. Yeah, and I remember video stores, it became like the cutting edge, where they would have the drop box for late night returns and stuff. But if you were late, they still would get you, because they knew your membership number from the tape. Man, how times had changed. From like the flimsy paper membership cards to, real plastic ones, or, like the Blockbuster laminated ones. Man. Anyway, I think I'm going to end it there. Like I said, VHS rental, it just became a blur from that point. I mean, those were just things that stood out from my like earliest memories. And from there, it was just an explosion. There were tapes everywhere. I was consuming movies on a weekend basis, new movies. And it wasn't until the 90s when I actually started following directors or certain actors and finding independent films and B movies. And next time I talk about this topic, I'll get into all that. But thank you for watching. Sorry for the creepy long intro to the episode, but I just wanted to let you all know where I'm coming from so you're all on board, and maybe we can all get, just a little feeling from this, communicate back and forth through the comments. So if you like this, give a thumbs up. Like I said before, if you got something to say, leave a comment. I love reading them. I love responding back. I love this community that we're growing. And if you're new, please subscribe. Hit the little bell and you'll be notified whenever there's a new episode of any of the shows that I put out. Anyway, until next time, keep being rad, stay dorky. See ya!